to Amara, our amazing sister. Happy birthday!
I can't believe you did this. Thank you both so much.
We love you. Enjoy your day. Happy birthday, Amara!
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. We are so happy to celebrate with you.
The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. It drizzled over the rows of black umbrellas, tapping softly like fingers against glass. The churchyard was small, old, and quiet, a place where time seemed to slow down. Beneath a gray sky, a modest casket rested near the open earth. Clara stood a few feet away, her hands clasped tightly together, her knuckles pale. She watched as the pastor spoke kind words about her mother, Evelyn Marsh, a woman everyone described as warm and giving. Clara's jaw tightened. Warm, giving. The words didn't match the woman she remembered in those last years. Distant eyes, half-finished sentences, walls built out of silence. Still, when the pastor said Evelyn's name, Clara felt something twist inside her chest. The service ended. People stepped forward one by one, dropping flowers into the grave. Clara didn't move until she was the last one standing. She placed a single white lily on the coffin lid. Rainwater slid down the petals and darkened the wood. "I hope you finally found peace," she whispered under her breath. Her voice was barely audible, swallowed by the steady sound of the rain. She turned to leave when a familiar voice called her name. "Clara, wait." It was Margaret, her mother's oldest friend. The woman's face was lined with age and sorrow. She held something wrapped carefully in a faded cloth. "Your mother wanted you to have this," Margaret said softly. "She told me to give it to you. When the time is right," Clara frowned. Margaret extended the bundle. When Clara unwrapped it, a small wooden box appeared. Dark oak, smooth but weathered, carved with winding patterns that looked like vines. A tiny brass lock sealed it shut. A folded note was tied around the box with a thin string. The handwriting was instantly familiar. The looping script her mother used on birthday cards and grocery lists. It read, "For when you're ready to see me as I truly was." Clara stared at the words until they blurred. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely steady. Margaret hesitated. "I don't know exactly. She never told me what was inside, only that you'd understand someday." Clara wanted to ask more, but the weight of the moment pressed down too heavily. Her throat tightened, and she could only nod. She tucked the box under her arm and stepped back into the rain. The cemetery path was muddy, and her heels sank with every step. She walked fast, trying to outrun the ache that grew with every breath. At her car, she stopped. The box sat on the passenger seat, silent, almost watching her. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Inside her mind, memories flickered. Her mother brushing her hair before school, laughter in the kitchen, the soft smell of cinnamon. Then the colder images followed. Slammed doors, arguments that ended in silence, the day her father left, and her mother refused to explain why. Clara's stomach twisted. "You always had secrets," she muttered. Even now, a gust of wind shook the car. She turned the key in the ignition, and the wipers began their rhythmic sweep. The box remained untouched beside her. When she finally reached her apartment, the rain had slowed to a whisper. She placed the box on her kitchen table, next to an untouched cup of tea from that morning. The carvings seemed almost alive in the dim light, curling like tiny roots searching for air. Her fingers brushed the lock. It was cold, heavier than she expected. She could open it now, she thought, but the idea made her chest tighten with something. Between fear and longing, for, "When you're ready to see me as I truly was," she pulled her hand back. "Not tonight," she whispered. Clara carried the box into her bedroom and placed it on the top shelf of her closet, behind an old sweater she never wore, out of sight, but not out of mind. As she turned off the light, the faint scent of rain still lingered in the air. Somewhere in the darkness, the wooden box waited, patient, silent, holding the truth she wasn't yet ready to face. The next morning, Sunlight tried to push through the gray clouds, but even the light seemed tired. Clara sat at her small kitchen table, staring at the half-empty mug of coffee in front of her. The box was still on the closet shelf, hidden away, but she could almost feel its presence pressing against the walls of her apartment. Everything felt too quiet. The refrigerator hummed softly, and rainwater dripped from the fire escape outside. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort. It reminded. Her eyes drifted to the framed photograph on the counter. Her and her mother, years ago, at a summer fair. Evelyn was smiling, her hair pinned up, her arm wrapped around Clara's shoulders. Clara must have been 9 or 10. In the picture, she was holding a balloon and grinning at the camera. Clara touched the glass gently. "When did it all change?" she whispered. The memories came uninvited. Her father's laughter echoing in the kitchen, the sound of old records playing on Sunday mornings, the warmth of family dinners that always seemed to end with her father making Evelyn laugh. Then one day he was gone, no warning, no note, no goodbye. Clara was 10 when her mother sat her down and said, "Your father had to go away for a while." She never said where or why, and every time Clara asked, Evelyn's face would harden. "Some truths cause more pain than lies," she'd say, and that was the end of it. The silence built a wall between them, brick by brick, year after year. By the time Clara was old enough to understand that her mother wasn't cruel, just afraid, it was already too late. The space between them had turned into years of distance, and neither of them knew how to cross it. Clara sighed and stood up, rubbing her temples. She tried to focus on work. Her computer screen glowed with a spreadsheet full of numbers, but the words and figures blurred together. She was a financial analyst, good at solving problems that didn't involve feelings. That was her comfort zone: logic, order, precision. But none of that helped when the ache in her chest refused to leave. A picture frame fell over on her desk, and she reached out to fix it. It was a photo of her and Evan, her ex-fiancé. They'd split a year ago. He had wanted more, not more love, but more of her. But Clara had built her walls too high, afraid of being hurt again, afraid of losing someone like she lost her father. "You never let me in," he had told her before leaving. "You don't even know how to need someone." At the time, she told herself he was wrong. Now, she wasn't so sure. She glanced toward the hallway, toward the closed closet door. The box. It was strange how something so small could take up so much space in her mind. She imagined it, sitting there, quietly holding pieces of the past. Maybe answers, maybe more pain. Curiosity tugged at her like a whisper she couldn't silence. "For when you're ready to see me as I truly was," she wasn't ready. Not yet. But every time she thought about her mother's handwriting, her chest tightened with guilt. That night, as she got ready for bed, she found herself standing by the closet again. She pulled the door open just a crack. The faint glow from the streetlights outside caught the edge of the box. It looked peaceful, patient, like it had been waiting a long time. Clara stepped back, shaking her head. "You don't get to haunt me," she said softly, though she knew she didn't mean it. She crawled into bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin. But sleep wouldn't come. Memories drifted in and out, her mother's laugh, the smell of garden roses, the slam of a door the day her father disappeared. She realized, with a pang, that her entire life had been shaped by things she didn't understand. Her mother's silence, her father's absence, the unanswered questions that had followed her into adulthood, and now that box, sitting in her closet like a doorway she was too afraid to open. She turned onto her side and stared at the ceiling. The sound of rain started again outside. Soft, steady, almost soothing. "I'm not ready," she whispered into the darkness. But deep down, she knew the truth. The box wasn't just about her mother. It was about her, about the life she'd built from silence, the walls she'd inherited without meaning to, and sooner or later, those walls would have to crack. As the night deepened, Clara finally drifted into uneasy sleep, and in her dreams, she saw her mother's face again. Not smiling, not sad, just waiting. The clock on Clara's nightstand glowed 2:47 a.m. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the city outside murmured with distant cars and whispering rain. Sleep hadn't come, not for hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the box, its carvings, her mother's handwriting, that single line. For when you're ready to see me as I truly was. It was maddening. Clara sat up, running a hand through her hair. This is ridiculous, she muttered. But her chest felt tight, as if something inside her was pulling her toward the truth she'd spent her whole life avoiding. Finally, with a sigh that sounded more like surrender, she got out of bed. The floor was cold under her bare feet as she crossed the room and opened the closet. The box sat exactly where she'd left it, hidden behind the old sweater. Its wooden surface caught the faint moonlight, glowing softly in the darkness. For a long moment, Clara just stood there. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. She carried it to the table in the living room and set it down gently. The box was heavier than she remembered, like it had been waiting for her. Her fingers brushed over the carvings again, swirling vines and leaves, each one carefully etched. The brass lock was small but firm. She hesitated, realizing she didn't have a key. Then she noticed something, a tiny crack where the lid met the base, just enough to wedge open with a hairpin. She took one from her nightstand drawer and slid it into the lock. A click echoed softly through the room. Clara froze. Then, slowly, she lifted the lid. The faint scent of cedar and old paper drifted out. Inside, several items were neatly arranged, each one deliberate, each one placed with care. A small bundle of letters, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. A photograph, its corners curled from age. A small brass key, dull with tarnish. And a sealed envelope addressed in her mother's handwriting. Clara, when you're ready. Clara's heartbeat quickened. She picked up the photograph first. It was her parents, standing together in front of a cabin she didn't recognize. They were smiling, her father's arm around Evelyn's waist, her mother's head resting against his shoulder. The photo was dated on the back, written in Evelyn's familiar looping script, May 2001. Clara's breath caught. That couldn't be right. Her father had disappeared in 2000. Her hand shook as she flipped the picture back over. The way her mother was looking at him, tender, almost shy, didn't match the story she'd been told all her life. She set the photo aside and picked up the letters. The ribbon came undone easily, and the papers unfolded with a soft crackle. Each letter was addressed to her father. The first one began simply, "My love, I still dream about the river." Clara frowned and read on. The words that followed weren't what she expected. They weren't bitter or angry. They were full of longing, fear, guilt, and something else she couldn't name. Evelyn wrote about running, about keeping her safe, and about the man who won't stop looking. She mentioned the truth we buried that night, and how she wished things could have been different. Clara's pulse pounded in her ears. Her mother's. Handwriting started neat and steady, but grew, shakier as the letters went on, the words more frantic, filled with pain. If you're reading this, I hope you've found peace. I don't know how much longer I can carry this alone. I can't tell Clara, not yet. She's too young, too innocent. She wouldn't understand what we did. The paper slipped from Clara's fingers. She leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. "What we did?" she whispered aloud. Her eyes darted to the brass key. It sat in the corner of the box, small and unassuming. She picked it up and felt its weight in her palm. It wasn't for the box. That much was clear. It was for something else, something waiting. Her gaze fell back to the sealed envelope with her name on it. She ran her thumb along the edge. For a second, she considered opening it, but something stopped her. A sense that this wasn't the right moment, that whatever waited inside would change everything. Instead, she gathered the letters and pressed them to her chest. A sob escaped her before she could stop it. All those years of silence, of unanswered questions, of pain. And her mother had been writing to the man who vanished, the man Clara had blamed her for losing. Tears blurred her vision. "You weren't cold," she whispered. "You were hiding something." She looked again at the photograph, the proof that her mother and father had been together after the world thought he'd disappeared. The date stared back at her like a wound. For the first time, Clara felt something shift inside. Anger mixing with confusion. Grief melting into a strange, raw hope. Maybe the story she'd believed all her life wasn't true. Maybe her mother hadn't been the villain after all. The letters trembled in her hands as she whispered, "What were you trying to protect me from, Mom?" The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. The open box sat between the shadows and the lamplight, no longer just an object, but a doorway, a quiet invitation to uncover the truth buried beneath years of love, loss, and secrets. And as Clara stared at the letters, she knew one thing for certain. She could never close that box again. The morning light crept through the curtains, pale and uncertain. Clara sat at the kitchen table, still in the same chair she had occupied most of the night. The open box was in front of her, surrounded by letters scattered like fallen leaves. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with tears that had long since dried. She had read each letter at least twice. Still, none of them answered the question that now haunted her. What happened to her father? Every line her mother wrote hinted at something terrible. The man who wouldn't go away. The night by the river. The truth we must never tell Clara. It didn't sound like a simple disappearance anymore. It sounded like a secret. One her mother had carried alone for decades. Clara rubbed her temples. "What did you do, Mom?" she whispered. The brass key sat beside her cup of cold coffee, gleaming faintly in the light. She turned it over in her fingers. It was small, plain, and old, maybe from a drawer or a chest, but it didn't belong to anything in her apartment. Then it hit her. The house. Her mother's house. The one she had inherited but barely visited since the funeral. Evelyn had lived there for over 30 years, and Clara had only spent enough time to pack a few boxes. She hadn't even gone through everything yet. She grabbed her coat and the key. The drive was short, maybe 20 minutes, but it felt much longer. The closer she got to the house, the heavier her chest became. The neighborhood looked the same. Quiet, tree-lined, with mailboxes leaning from years of use. The house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, its white paint faded, and its porch creaking with every gust of wind. Clara unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust, her mother's favorite scent. Everything was neat, untouched since the funeral. Evelyn's framed photographs lined the hallway. Clara as a child. School pictures. A few faded family portraits from when her father was still around. She moved through the rooms slowly, as if walking through a memory. The old piano still stood in the corner, the one her mother used to play when Clara couldn't sleep. She pressed a key gently. A soft, broken note echoed back. Then she remembered the attic. Her mother had always kept it locked, saying it was just storage. Clara hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now the small brass key in her hand suddenly felt heavier. The attic door was at the end of the upstairs hallway. The lock was simple, old-fashioned. Clara hesitated, then slid the key in. It fit perfectly. The click that followed sent a shiver down her spine. She pushed the door open. The air was colder up here, dry and thick with dust. Boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, labeled in her mother's careful handwriting. Christmas, old clothes, books. But in the far corner, beneath a faded blanket, was a chest. It was wooden, dark like the box from home, though larger and sturdier. The brass latch was worn but intact. Clara pulled off the blanket and knelt beside it. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside were newspaper clippings, old photos, and several notebooks tied together with string. The top clipping caught her eye first. The yellowed headline read, "Local man missing after late-night dispute." Her breath caught. The article was dated May 2000, the missing man's name, Daniel Cross. She scanned the short paragraph. Businessman, last seen near the Marsh family property. Police investigating foul play. Clara's pulse quickened. Daniel Cross. She had never heard that name before. But why was this here, in her mother's attic, locked away like something forbidden? She opened one of the journals. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's. Graceful, neat, and familiar. June 2nd, 2000, he came to the house again tonight. He said he'd tell Clara everything if I didn't convince him to stop. Robert lost his temper. There was shouting. I tried to calm them both, but Daniel wouldn't listen. He followed Robert down to the river. I shouldn't have let him go. I shouldn't have let either of them go. Clara's hands shook as she flipped the pages. Each entry grew more frantic. June 3rd. The police were here. They asked about Daniel. I told them Robert left after an argument. That was true in a way, but it isn't the whole truth. I don't know how to live with what happened by the water. I keep hearing the sound. I keep seeing the light in the trees. The next page was torn. The final entry ended abruptly, scrawled in shaky ink. He never meant to kill him. I had to protect them both. Clara dropped the notebook, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. The air in the attic felt thinner now, harder to breathe. Kill him, she whispered. No, that can't be right. But deep down, she knew. Her father hadn't just left. Something terrible had happened that night, something her mother had hidden. From the police, from the world, from her. She stood up too quickly, the chest still open beside her. For a moment, she just stared down at it, her thoughts spinning. Evelyn had carried this burden for decades. Every cold glance, every avoided question, every "some truths cause more pain than lies." It all made sense now. Her mother had been living with guilt, and maybe protecting Clara from something darker than she'd ever imagined. Clara sank to the floor, clutching one of the journals against her chest. Tears burned her eyes, not just from fear, but from heartbreak. Heartbreak for a woman she had misunderstood her entire life. Through blurred vision, she looked toward the open attic door. The morning sun had begun to creep in, lighting the dust in golden streaks. Clara wiped her face, her voice barely a whisper. "What were you hiding, Mom? And what did Dad do?" The chest sat silent, the answers lying inside, old paper, ink, and pain too deep to speak aloud. And though she didn't yet know the full truth, Clara understood one thing clearly now. Her mother had been right. Some truths really did cause more pain than lies, approx. 1,000 words. Tone. Intense, revelatory, emotional. The journals sat in front of Clara on the dining table, their pages trembling slightly from the draft that slipped through the open window. Outside, the afternoon sky had turned a deep gray, heavy with rain, the kind that smelled of soil and memory. She had read everything. Every page, every broken confession. The story they told was not the one she'd grown up believing. Her father hadn't vanished after an argument and simply never come home. He'd been there that night, the night Daniel Cross went missing. He'd been there by the river, and so had Evelyn. The final entries in her mother's journal painted the truth in aching, fragmented pieces. He was going to tell Clara everything. He said she had a right to know who he really was. I told him it would destroy her. He laughed, and said secrets always destroy people eventually. Robert pushed him first. I screamed. It happened so fast. The fall, the splash, the silence. We searched, but the river was dark, the current too strong. By the time the police came, Daniel was gone. Robert begged me to lie. For Clara. For the life we still had. I said yes, but I died a little inside when I did. Clara closed her eyes. Her throat ached. Her father, the man she had idealized all her life, had killed someone. And her mother had covered it up. But who was Daniel Cross? Why had he wanted to tell her who he really was? She turned back to the journals, flipping through until she found a name underlined twice in the margin. Clara's birth certificate. A folded document was tucked between the pages. Her hands shook as she pulled it out. At first glance, it looked like a copy of her birth record. Her name, date of birth, hospital, all familiar. But under Father's name, something made her heart stop. Not Robert Marsh. It read, Daniel Cross. The paper slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. Her breath came in shallow bursts. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, that's not possible, but it was. It all fit now, her mother's secrecy, her father's rage, the man who wouldn't go away. Daniel Cross hadn't been some stranger. He had been her biological father, the man Evelyn had loved before Robert, the man who had wanted to claim her, the man Robert had confronted by the river that night. And he never came back. Clara stumbled back from the table, gripping the edge of a chair to steady herself. Her vision blurred with tears, the truth twisting through her chest like a blade. All her life she'd seen her father as a victim, a man who disappeared, maybe betrayed, maybe wronged, and her mother as the cold one, too distant, too guarded. But the truth shattered that story into pieces she couldn't fit back together. Evelyn had lived with guilt not because she'd lost her husband, but because she'd lost two. One to violence, and one to silence. The thunder outside cracked, loud and close. Rain began to pound against the windows, as if the world itself wanted to wash the secret clean. Clara sank to the floor and pressed her hands against her face. "Oh, Mom," she choked out between sobs. "You carried all of this alone." Minutes passed, or maybe hours. When she finally looked up, the light in the room had dimmed, leaving everything washed in storm-gray shadow. Her gaze fell on the sealed envelope from the box. "Clara, when you're ready." She'd left it unopened, afraid of what it might hold. But now she was ready. Or at least, as ready as she could ever be. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was soft, worn at the edges, as if it had been read many times by the woman who wrote it. "My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've found the truth I couldn't tell you while I lived. I've imagined this moment for years, wondering if you would hate me. I wouldn't blame you if you did. There's no easy way to say what happened. The man the police searched for, Daniel, was your father by blood. But Robert was the man who raised you, who loved you every day of your life. I never wanted you to see one as the villain and the other as the victim. Both were human, both made choices, and both loved you in their own flawed ways. That night by the river, everything went wrong. I wish I could undo it. I wish I could tell you it was an accident. But I don't know anymore. I only know that fear made us both liars. I kept the secret to protect you, not from the world, but from the weight of it. The kind that breaks people. I know it broke me. I see now that protecting you also meant keeping you from the truth, and that may have been my greatest mistake. Forgive me, if you can, not because I deserve it, but because you do. Love, Mom." The words blurred as tears filled Clara's eyes again. Forgiveness. That was the one thing her mother had asked for. Not understanding, not absolution, but the release that only love could bring. Clara pressed the letter to her chest. The ache inside her was sharp, but beneath it was something else. Clarity. For the first time in her life, she saw her mother not as the distant, guarded woman she'd grown up resenting, but as a person, fragile, frightened, capable of love and mistakes in equal measure. And her father, both of them, had been bound together by choices made in fear and love, the same way people often are. The storm outside began to fade. The thunder rolled away, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost sacred. Clara stood and walked to the window. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle. The garden below was slick with water, the flowers bending low under its weight. She thought of the river, of that night her mother had written about, and of the years of silence that followed. For a long moment, she simply breathed. Then she whispered, "I forgive you, Mom." The words didn't feel forced. They felt real, heavy, and freeing at once. In that moment, something shifted inside her. The grief didn't vanish, but it changed shape, from anger to understanding, from loss to love. And though the truth had broken her world apart, she could finally see that it hadn't destroyed her. It had made her whole. The next morning dawned pale and still. For the first time in days, there was sunlight, soft and golden, slipping through the thin curtains of Clara's apartment. It painted her mother's letter, still resting on the table, in a quiet glow. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Evelyn, not the woman in the hospital bed, frail and fading, but the mother she remembered as a child, the one who sang while cooking, whose laugh carried warmth into every room. And now she would hear her again, through the letter she had saved for last. Clara sat down, heart heavy but calm. Her fingers brushed over the envelope addressed in that familiar looping script. For Clara, my last truth. She opened it carefully, unfolding the paper like something sacred. My sweet girl, if you're reading this, you've walked through the hardest part, the truth. I wish I could hold you, but this letter will have to be my hands now. There are so many things I wanted to tell you, but life has a way of silencing what matters most. I told myself that keeping quiet was love, that by carrying the burden alone, I was protecting you. But I see now that I was only protecting myself from your disappointment. I know you hated me for my silence. I don't blame you. I hated myself too. You were always so much like me. Stubborn, strong, afraid to need anyone. I used to look at you and see my own walls staring back at me. I wanted you to be freer than I ever was, but I taught you fear instead of courage. If love means anything, it's the courage to be seen, even when it breaks us. I never found that courage in time. But maybe you can. Clara pressed her lips together as tears welled again. Each sentence felt like a hand reaching out across time. Not to explain, but to connect. She turned the page gently. When your father died, both of them, in their own ways, I tried to build a life from silence. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would all stay buried. But love doesn't die in silence. It grows heavy. It waits to be spoken. There were nights I stood outside your door just to listen to you breathe, promising myself I'd tell you the truth in the morning. But morning always came with fear. Fear that I'd lose you too. I kept the box because I hoped that someday you'd be ready to see me not as your mother, but as a woman, flawed, frightened, and still learning how to love. I want you to know this, Clara. I never regretted loving your father, either of them, and I never once regretted you. If you can, forgive me, not the past, but the fear that shaped it. And if forgiveness feels too heavy, then let understanding be enough. Love always, Mom. By the time she finished, Clara's face was wet with tears. But they weren't the same kind of tears she'd cried before. Not the hard, angry kind that burned. These were soft, cleansing. She read the letter again, slower this time, letting every word sink in. It wasn't just a confession. It was a surrender. Evelyn's final act of love wasn't in hiding the truth. It was in finally letting her daughter face it. Clara folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest. "I forgive you," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but there was peace in it. "I forgive all of it." The room felt lighter somehow, not empty, but open. The air itself seemed to exhale with her. Outside, the sky cleared completely, and sunlight filled every corner of the apartment. The wooden box sat quietly on the table, its carvings glinting faintly in the light. For the first time, Clara didn't see it as a symbol of pain or secrecy. It was something else now, a bridge between what was lost and what could finally be found. She placed Evelyn's letter back inside the box, closed the lid, and rested her hand on top of it. "I see you now," she whispered softly, and for the first time in her life, she meant it. The river was quieter than Clara remembered. It stretched before her in a long silver ribbon, calm under the pale afternoon sun. Trees leaned over its edges, their branches swaying gently in the wind, scattering leaves that floated down to join the slow-moving current. The same river her mother had written about, the same one where everything began and ended. Clara stood on the bank, a small urn cradled in her hands. Inside were the ashes of her mother, mixed with those of the man she now understood as both her fathers. One by blood, one by love. Evelyn's final wish had been for them to rest here together. The thought made Clara's throat tighten, but there was peace in it too. For the first time, she wasn't running from the past. She was facing it and letting it go. A soft breeze rippled across the water. The air smelled of wet earth and wildflowers. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the sound of the current, the steady heartbeat of nature itself. It reminded her of childhood, of laughter, of simpler times before silence settled between them. She whispered quietly, "You both carried so much. I carried it too, but it ends here." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the urn. Ashes, soft, gray, delicate, caught the sunlight as she scattered them into the river. They floated for a moment, glimmering like silver dust, then drifted apart, carried away by the water's gentle pull. Clara watched until they disappeared from sight. Her chest ached, but the heaviness that had lived there for years began to ease. Slowly, quietly, like morning fog lifting, she sat down on a smooth rock near the water's edge, the wooden box resting beside her. Its surface had faded over time, the carvings softened by touch and age. She ran her fingers along the lid, tracing the shapes her mother must have once traced too. This box had been many things, a mystery, a burden, a wound. But now it was something else entirely. It was a vessel of truth, Evelyn's truth, Clara's truth, their shared story. Clara opened the box one last time. Inside lay only the folded letter she'd written that morning, her own goodbye. The words were simple but true. "You don't need to hide anymore. I understand. I forgive. And I'll carry your love forward, not your silence." She read it once more, then placed it inside the box. Carefully she closed the lid, locking it with the small brass clasp that clicked softly, final and sure. For a moment, she held it against her heart, breathing in deeply. The air felt clean, the sunlight warmer now. Then, standing, she walked to the edge of the river. "Goodbye, Mom," she whispered. "Goodbye, Dad." And with steady hands, she set the box into the water. It floated for a moment, turning gently in the current, catching flashes of sunlight as it drifted downstream. The sight was strangely beautiful, a farewell not of sorrow, but of peace. As it disappeared beyond the bend, Clara felt something within her loosen completely. The years of anger, confusion, and pain no longer held her in their grip. For the first time, she felt light. She stayed there a while, watching the ripples fade. The wind brushed against her hair, cool and kind, and in that quiet moment, she realized something she had never understood before, that forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a choice, made again and again, every time the heart remembered what it lost. As the sun began to set, Clara turned to leave. The sky burned with soft gold and deep pink, reflecting off the surface of the river like liquid fire. Behind her, the water carried away the box, the ashes, and the pain of generations, leaving only love in its wake. And as she walked back up the trail, the wind whispered through the trees, almost like a voice, gentle, familiar, and free. 6 months later, the world felt different, lighter somehow, not because everything was fixed, but because Clara had finally learned how to live with the truth. Her small apartment looked brighter these days. Sunlight filled the room each morning, spilling across the kitchen counter and the desk by the window, the one now covered in papers, notebooks, and half-filled pages. Clara had started writing again. Not just letters or fragments of thought, but a story, her story and her mother's. A memoir that began not with the box, but with the silence before it. She wrote about Evelyn as she truly was. Strong, scared, loving, flawed, human. At first, the words had come slowly, hesitant, unsure. But as the days passed, they began to flow like the river she had stood beside. Steady, cleansing, unstoppable. Each sentence felt like a bridge between the past and the present, between the girl who once resented her mother and the woman who could finally forgive her. Sometimes, Clara would pause and glance at the photograph on her desk, her mother standing beside her as a child, both smiling at something unseen. She would trace the edges of the frame, whispering softly, "I see you now." Those 4 words had become her quiet prayer, her reminder that love could survive even the heaviest truths. Her fiancé, Mark, had come back into her life too, tentatively at first. A coffee, a walk, a long conversation about everything that had once gone unsaid. For the first time, Clara didn't hide. She told him everything. About the letters, the secrets, the river, about how love and pain had lived side by side her whole life, and how she was finally learning to accept both. And he listened. This time, she didn't push him away. On her desk sat a small wooden carving, the only thing she kept from the box before letting it drift away. A single piece of the lid, worn smooth by water and time. She had placed it there not as a reminder of sorrow, but of truth, because in opening the box, she hadn't just uncovered her mother's secrets. She had uncovered her own heart. And that, she realized now, was what her mother had always wanted.